So here's the panel. You have a lot from Dr. Cohon, Dean Dammon. So probably I want to start with the question for you, Dr. Feldman. I saw this in this Nikkei, or NHK actually, that the Prime Minister decided to join TPP negotiation. It just a start, decided to negotiate first and then negotiate the terms and conditions of the TPP. I don't know you're supportive or you're against it, but would you just comment about its decision, importance of it, as well as the impact you can see for Japanese economy?
Thank you very much, Fujimori-san, for that very nice introduction. Let me just quickly comment on why I think the TPP is important, but also link this to the context of the remarks by Dr. Cohon in particular. What are the problems that the world faces, and what are the problems that, say, CMU or Todai or other universities need to address to save the world? There are some very, very serious problems out there. Dr. Cohon mentioned the energy problem. That's at the top of my list, not the physical problem, the energy problem. TPP is important in all of these problems, addressing all of these problems, because it is a comprehensive agreement among countries to raise interaction at all levels in many areas. There was just a recent book by an economist, sociologist, physicist, etc. He does everything. W. Brian Arthur from the Santa Fe Institute. The book, I think, is called The Nature of Technology. What is it and where does it come from? And in that book, Dr. Arthur said that innovation comes from the mixture of new ideas aimed toward an intentional purpose. Well, if you don't have people getting together in a much more sort of dense fashion, without that interaction, the new ideas don't come out. Okay? So for me, TPP is very important because it will help spur this interaction of ideas, interaction of people at all levels of society, and help us address some of these issues in food, in water, in physical deficits, in demographics, in entitlements, in governance, in voting systems, in ethics. All of these things have to work together if we are going to address the problems that the world faces right now. So from my point of view, yes, TPP is very important for Japanese agriculture to get it up to speed. Yes, it's very important for opening markets, but it's even more important for creating the intellectual milieu, the intellectual environment in which people from all countries can get together and get to work on these issues. So that's why I think it's important.
Now, just one more question, Dr. Feldman, about the President Obama. Now it's on the USA side. US politicians sort of blaming Mr. Obama going Pacific for 9 days. They're saying that there are a lot of things to do in the United States to create jobs for Americans. But Mr. Obama says always that Asian Pacific is a big tie with the creating American jobs. How would you relate those two things together?
If you look at the history of trade agreements among countries, starting with the the Coal and Steel Pact in Europe just after World War II, what we've seen is that trade agreements among countries typically increase employment. So not to join a trade agreement, to stay home, to look at your belly button, while other people are negotiating trade agreements, is a good way to reduce employment at home. So I think in this case, President Obama is perfectly right. The future of demand growth right now in the world is in Asia. The future of capital accumulation is in Asia. That's how the world makes itself more prosperous, more wealthy. The future of a lot of the progress that we can make in American society or in Japanese society as industrial countries is deeply, deeply connected to trade with Asia. After all, there are a lot of people in China, in India, and other countries who are still trying to raise their standard of living. How can they do that without capital accumulation? How can they do that without better technology? Those are the things that schools like CMU, like Todai, are very good at producing because we're so international. So to me, the notion that you can create more jobs by staying at home is ridiculous.
Okay, thank you. Now, I had a plan to have at least 3 series of questions for the panel. But as I look at the watch right now, I think we have 15 minutes to go. And if I don't involve you into this panel, I think you'll be very bored. So now, by now, you get some perspective from Dr. Cohon, Dean Dammon, and Dr. Feldman from a business standpoint. I just want to open up the panel to you about anything you want to ask any one of those panels. By that way, I just want to be a little more interactive with the audience here. So I'll point you if you have any questions or any point that you want to make on those points that they talked about. Here you go, Abe-san.
Okay, well, I'm supposed to ask some questions, so I will. Well, since I'm working for a major city gas company in Japan, the biggest city gas company, and we advocate for clean energy, I want to ask some questions related to this. And some people, actually, I had some meeting. I listened to the presentation from Bloomberg guy who mentioned about how clean energy market goes up. And he said, now market's very small, but it's going up quickly. And I challenged to him that, okay, suppose you are working for GM and selling car, and I purchased it. It was taking 30 minutes to get to the supermarket. Now it's taking only 2 minutes. Wow, I'm happy. So everybody started buying cars. Then production goes up, and the price goes down. But in case for clean energy, no matter how you make electricity, photovoltaic, windmills, whatever it is, electricity is electricity. So you can get any additional benefit. How can we, I don't know, make it big business? Only way we can make this business in Japan is getting money from government. No way you can make this as real business. And that's a question we have right now. If you have some idea on this, I would be appreciated. Thank you.
I'm sure Dr. Feldman has something to say about that, but I will give you my answer. It's very simple, a carbon tax. If there was a carbon tax, you would need nothing else to incentivize and see a very rapid growth in clean energy technologies. And one of the things that drives me somewhat crazy from the American perspective is if you get a CEO of an energy company or any major company alone in a room and say, really, what do you think about global climate change and energy? You say, we should have a carbon tax. But of course, publicly, that's like political death. You can't even talk about that in America. But anyhow, that's politics. The answer is a carbon tax or cap and trade or some variation of it. There's such a strong case for this from an economic perspective, from an engineering perspective, that it will happen. It's only a question of when and whether it'll happen soon enough. I'll just note, Australia just adopted it.
Okay, if I may, let me add a couple things. I think Dr. Cohon has just pointed out one of the absolute crucial elements of this, which is the entire world has been mispricing energy for years. And I don't mean 2 or 3 years, I mean 40, 50 years. We have the wrong price. Part of it is that we don't put a price on carbon emissions. Another part of it is we don't, apparently, as far as I can read, we do not put a price on decommissioning nuclear power plants. We don't put a price on a number of the externalities that are well known in the energy business. As an economist, my view is you internalize the externalities by changing the pricing structure. Okay? Just after the earthquake here in Japan and the tsunami, the great tragedy, some friends of mine and I were out talking about policy proposals. one of the proposals we made was to actually raise the price of energy quite substantially. Japanese energy prices are already high. But at the same time, lower income tax and corporation tax. So the net tax take would be the same, but the incentives from the system would create the most energy efficient country on earth by a long shot. Japan is already good. In fact, it probably is the most energy efficient of the industrial countries. Maybe some of the Scandies do a little better. But we could do much, much more. So first, get the pricing right. Second, vested interests. Japan, the United States are replete with vested interests that are stopping progress on the energy agenda. In Japan, we have the issue of very heavy involvement of some of the energy suppliers in political contributions. And this skews the development of technology in one direction. The last 40 years, it's been in favor of nuclear. If renewables were given the same per kilowatt subsidy as some other energy forms, particularly oil or nukes, we would probably be farther along. Why doesn't it happen? Because the system is vulnerable, the political system is vulnerable to vested interests. A third one, and this is our job as eggheads, is to be ready with new ideas, good ideas, developed ideas, when society is ready to hear them. What I mean by this is as follows. I have a model for thinking about how societies make decisions, or difficult decisions, that I call the CRIC cycle. CRIC stands for Crisis, Response, Improvement, Complacency. Okay? This is a sort of a cycle of the way in political economy, very much based on the old agricultural models, such as the cobweb model or the hog cycle. Okay? In the hog business, it's easy to understand. It takes about 2 years to raise a hog. Okay? If prices are high this year, everybody raises hogs. 2 years from now, there are a lot of hogs. So the price goes down. Nobody raises hogs. 2 years later, there are no hogs. So the price goes up. So you get these big cycles. The same thing happens in many areas of economic policy. Without a real crisis, people just don't focus. Okay? This is inevitable. We're all primates. We have serious myopia. Our job as eggheads, as thinkers about policy, as technologists in material science, in business, is to come up with ideas that are shovel-ready when the price goes up enough to make people listen. Why did Japan shift in favor of TPP a couple of years ago? The public mind basically shifted in favor of agricultural reform. Why did that happen? It's because the Russians put on export controls on grain. Japan imports more grain than any other country on earth, and people got scared. Okay, what do? We have to redo our agricultural system. Well, in energy, it's the same issue. Prices will go up again. And when they do, we need to be ready with ideas about the tax system, with the political system, et cetera, so we can end this myopia and have a better solution. Let me stop there. I have some numbers too later on, but we can talk about that later.
Thank you. Here you go. By the way, would you just introduce yourself? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Justin Dingra. I'm class of 2006, Mellon College of Science. My question is in relevance to the diversity of the student body. How do you feel about the current representation, socially, economically, internationally, and what are we doing going forward in trying to attract? The basis is to try to attract the best students possible, but also there are, certain international bodies that are represented more just because of population demographic, like India, China. Japan is maybe underrepresented, perhaps, I don't know. But I just would like to hear your thoughts on the diversity of the campus.
Let me talk from the perspective of the entire university and the undergraduate student body. And Dean Dammon might want to comment from the perspective of the Tepper School, especially the master's class. Without question, the undergraduate student body is also the most diverse right now than it has ever been on many, many measures. But you're quite right, or I inferred from what you said, and I think you intended it this way. There are some regions of the world and some individual countries that are underrepresented, Japan being one of them. We used to have many more students from Japan than we do now. We currently have about 40 or so, 40 or 45 from Japan in our student body. And by that I mean the entire student body. That's doctorate, master's, and undergraduate. That's 40-some students out of 11,000. That's about half what it used to be. And I believe it's primarily because the practice of corporate sponsorship of students to study in America has been reduced in Japan. And so money is an issue. And that leads me to the other thing I want to say about this. We are a very expensive university. We know that. Our tuition is extremely high. We also are a university because of our relatively small endowment, which is not only true for the Tepper School, but for the entire university. We have limited resources for financial aid. We don't give as much financial aid as some of the other very expensive, very selective universities. The result of that is that we have too many students attending whose financial need is not being met by the university. The result of which is either they don't finish, well, thankfully that doesn't happen so much anymore, or they graduate with a lot of debt. We know this is a deterrent to some groups of people in the US, and absolutely to students from other countries, because we don't give financial aid to international students. So we get very few international students from families other than upper middle class or very wealthy families. That bothers us. It will only change, though, when our endowment gets much bigger. And that's what this campaign is all about and what future fundraising will be about, too. Bobby,
Yeah, at the business school, we're seeing exactly the same trends that Jerry just mentioned. In the 1980s, we saw a lot more students from Japan, corporate-sponsored students. I think I just looked at the statistics before I came here. In the entering class, this MBA class, I think we have 5 or 6 from Japan out of a class size of 200. That's small. We're getting huge demand for our MBA program from India now. Something like 40% of all of our applications come from India now. We could fill our entire class with outstanding students, international students, with GMATs of over 700. But we value diversity, as a business school, because I think it enhances the education for everybody, and it makes the program more global to bring those different perspectives. I would like to see it a bit more diverse from the international, the different countries that get represented, a little bit more diversity among the international countries that we attract. About 30% of our total student body is from outside the U.S. And the trend that we're seeing, and I don't know whether this is just a short-term trend because of the economy or whether this is a real shift, the demand coming from the U.S. is declining for MBAs. The actual number of applications has declined 3 years straight. But from international students, it's really taken off, especially from India. Yeah.
And China, maybe. Okay, this is the last question.
Already? Boy, Fuji. You're the boss. You can go as long as you want.
I have 5 minutes that I'm going to
Okay.
spend the last session. So, maybe 2 questions.
Hi, Dr. Feldman. My name's Lydia, and I'm a Heinz graduate of O10. And I was just wondering, you talked about the opportunity for intervention with shovel-ready solutions for energy. And I just wondered what, after the tragedy of 3/11, are those being evaluated in a different way? And what might be some of the consequences? And just generally from a CMU perspective, was there any attention or brainstorming or different thinking on campus when that event occurred from the students and just kind of the outreach that happened? Thank you.
I would say that we just continue to do what we were doing, which is to be very actively exploring and questioning every aspect of energy production and use. And this is true for all forms. So nuclear, natural gas is a big local issue now. For those who have not been around our part of the U.S. in the last 2 years, there's a deposit of natural gas held in tight shale formations deep underground. For us, it's called the Marcellus Shale. And there's a new way to exploit this, and it has environmental impacts. So we're sort of seeing a reliving of the coal and gas age in Western Pennsylvania. We're very involved in that. Heinz students are doing a project on the water impacts of Marcellus Shale this semester, and their faculty doing research. With regard to nuclear, though, I can't point to any particular activity that was prompted by the events here.
This is not an area of great expertise on my part, but I do know that in Japan, there is obviously a rethinking of all of the stages of the energy issue. Conservation was the one that I think made the most progress in light of what happened in Fukushima. All of a sudden, over the summer, the government called on businesses to cut 15%. They did it. If somebody told you tomorrow you have to cut 15% out of your budget, you'd say, that's crazy, I can't possibly do it. They did it because it was necessary. So when confronted with a crisis, human beings can be very inventive. And so I think on the conservation side, a lot was done. And then things start occurring to people. I had 2 client meetings today in our little meeting rooms on the 11th floor of our building. I took both clients to the window and I tapped on the window. Is there anything funny about this window? And they looked at it and they looked out the window at the Mitsukoshi across the street. No, I don't see it. No, that's not what it's about. It's about the window. It's single paned. The diffusion rate of double paned windows in Japan is very low. This is bizarre for a country that's supposed to be so good about energy conservation. Okay? So that is improving. I think the natural gas issue is going very well here. If you look at natural gas prices in Asia, as opposed to the United States, they're at oil parity. In the United States, gas, I understand now, is being priced at the equivalent of $23 a barrel for oil. So a quarter of what oil is selling for is, in energy terms, is what the gas is selling for. In Asia, my colleague tells me, gas is actually priced a little bit above parity for oil, which says to me that there is not really a good global market in gas. It's harder to move around than oil, okay? So what this is asking us to do is develop new technology to move gas around a little more efficiently so we can start a market in it. So all these things are beginning to happen. I was in Malaysia a couple weeks ago. Peninsular Malaysia, not the Borneo part, Peninsular Malaysia is going to start being a net importer of gas in the next few years. This is a very different world. They're going to have to build import facilities. So there's a huge recognition around the world that gas is our future for the next few years. But after that, we're not really sure about the technology. I hope it's accelerating in all areas, even in nukes. I'm not theologically against nukes. I just want to see the technology to make them really cheap, okay, and a little safer, get the waste issues settled. But we need, call it, a reallocation of budget toward the technology side in order to get this done, and that runs up against a wall when you've got a government here, a government in the United States, a governments in Europe that are unable to control entitlement spending. So this is the issue that we're facing. And I hope in the next budget our government here in Japan comes up with, that we at least make some steps toward taking money out of the budget for, shall we say, spending in social areas that is really not very productive, like torturing old people in hospitals. We do a lot of that, okay? And we shouldn't do that because our ethics haven't caught up with our technology yet. One of my favorite quotations from Martin Luther King, so he's talking about how our ethics haven't caught up with our science, and he says we have guided missiles but misguided men. Okay? It's a very nice quote. That's exactly what we've got. If we're going to solve these energy problems, we have to make decisions like that. So if you're over 50, look in the mirror and say the problem is me. Okay? Because we're the ones who have to say, okay, we have to give up something out of our, expected benefits to make the world a better place. And I hope that, realization is spreading.
Fuji, just one number to reinforce the first point Dr. Feldman made with regard to conservation. In the U.S. energy economy, 55% of all the energy that's either extracted or produced or transmitted is lost, is never used. It's lost along the way, 55%. So the opportunities there for gains, for finding new energy are phenomenal. But we need to have incentives, get the prices right. Yeah.
One more?
Let me add one more number. I did some very simple calculations. You'll probably laugh at this, but I started with global energy, primary energy use in 2007. The number I got was 96.7, quadrillion, zillion, whatever units it was, okay? So we started at 96.7. If we repeat the miracle of the last 20 years, that is 3.5% GDP growth, but only 2% primary energy growth. If we repeat that miracle for the next 50 years, 2% primary energy growth, and then add it all up, okay, take that next 50 years worth of energy use, that comes to about 8.4 trillion barrels of oil equivalent, 8.4. How much do we have in fossils today? Well, current proven reserves of oil, regular natural gas, and coal are about 5.7. If you add in the extra shale gas that Dr. Cohon just mentioned, the U.S. government estimate 1.1 trillion barrels of oil equivalent. So you get 6.8. We need 8.4, we've got 6.8, so there's a gap already. And by the way, after 50 years, the 6.8, the fossil stuff, is gone. We've got to grow the alternatives, or shall we say the combination of renewables and conservation at the pace of about 5.8% per year every year for the next 50 years to make sure that the lights are still on when the fossils are gone. That's the issue we're facing. When I did those numbers just a couple of weeks ago, I was scared. I was genuinely scared. Am I off base on that?
I want to throw
Okay.
another number here.
Okay.
I think you know the statistics as well, that there are three segments of energy consumption. Transportation, like jet engines and Shinkansen. The other one is factories. When you look at the energy consumption increase rate from 1990, for 20 years to today, transportation segment and the factories didn't increase much at all.
Yeah.
Flat. What was increasing at 30% is residential side and commercial buildings.
Is that U.S. or
Japan?
Japan.
So from 1990 to today, residential and commercial buildings spent 35% every year till today. So we, as a company, Lixil, we are campaigning zero energy home or zero energy building, which we can do with the technology we have. A little bit.
And you'll be happy to sell, I'm sure.
But that would save 20 nuclear plants.
Yes.
That's something we can do not only by the effort that you talk about, but also the technology that we develop together. Dr. Cohn mentioned about 55% loss till when we get to the home or the buildings. In Japan, the issue is the last 1 mile of the total smart grid. So if we solve this, the last 1 mile of the grid, by reducing the consumption at our end, that would be a totally different world that we can achieve.
And just imagine if there was a carbon tax or some right pricing. These things would take off. People would clamor for it, absolutely.
Can I say one
Sure,
other thing? One other thing about
absolutely.
that, yeah. So I think of this, these guys know a lot more about energy and alternative energies than I do. So I think of these things as an economist. And the carbon tax is good for many reasons. But I think perhaps one of the most important ones is that I personally don't trust the politicians to be able to figure out what the right alternative is. So having government invest in alternatives and make decisions, they're not very good at choosing winners and losers. In fact, the track record is not good on that. And if you've been reading anything about the U.S., you probably have read about some of the investments that the government has made in some alternative energy companies that didn't quite make it, so to speak. So the advantage of a carbon tax is clearly then you put the onus on the private sector to figure out what the best alternatives are. And I have much more confidence in the free market being able to do that. And so I think that, for me, is the real reason why a carbon tax is the way to go.
You got the right question to spend 15 minutes on this subject.